had an interesting life
Yeah.
because of the fact that Grandpa was in the Navy,
Yeah.
and we did a lot of traveling, lived in a lot of different places, and the fact that I had a successful career and one that wasn't successful. So I've had and raised 4 children. So it's been a lot of things that have gone on in my life, and interesting things, I think, at least interesting to me.
Yeah, obviously, and of total interest to us. And we always get your great stories, off the cuff when we're at dinners or whatever, little snippets here and there. And Jasmine and I was just like, wow, we'd love to hear more about that. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm glad that you're that interested. That's wonderful because you are the future, and you'll pass this on to the future. That's excellent. I'm very pleased about that.
Of course. So, our first question was just kind of, about what was your childhood like?
I lived in San Francisco and have a brother and a sister, and went to the Lafayette Grammar School. And the big change in my life was when Grandpa decided to change our name from Schmolowitz to Small. I experienced a lot of anti-Semitism in school with the name of Schmolowitz, and I ran for a school office and lost. After he changed the name to Small, I ran for the same school office and won. And I realized that names matter. Now, the reason that he changed the name was because of my brother. He knew that eventually we would remarry, or not remarry, but get married, and that would change our name. But he felt that it was an impediment, or rather a problem that he could avoid by changing the name. So he looked up what was Schmolowitz in Polish, and it turned out that Schmolowitz was small village. Well, he thought that small would be a better last name than village, so he changed the name to Small. And my life changed with that change of name. I was assimilated, I was accepted, whereas I was made fun of with the name of Schmolowitz, because it was, now ethnic names are in, but then Jones and Smith were the names that were in, and so that was a big change in my life. And as a result of that, I became treasurer of the. I was voted treasurer of the student body, and I became one of the top gals in the school, and I had a lot of fun, a lot more fun than I would have, otherwise.
Were there other Jewish children at the school that you went to?
It wasn't primarily Jewish. There were a few. There was one other girl who was Jewish that I knew, and one guy who was Jewish that I knew, and none of the rest of them. Yeah.
But I assume that was probably a common thing, that Jewish people came in and changed their names to be accepted.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was, exactly. Now it isn't, but then it was.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any favorite stories from that time in your life, with either running for office or, just anything that had to do with the family?
Oh, I will tell you a story. I will tell you a story. When I was the treasurer of the student body, you belonged to the Girls Service Society, GSS, and we wore little caps that identified you as a Girls Service Society. And I ran around with a group of girls, and we would sneak out of school at noontime and go across the street, and we'd smoke. And of course, this was terrible. 2 things were terrible. First, sneaking out of school when you weren't supposed to leave the school grounds, and of course, smoking was a terrible thing to do. So one day, one of the teachers saw us going across the school and reported us to the principal. And I was about to graduate, a senior, and I was supposed to give the valedictorian speech. And she reported me, and I was called down to the principal's office, and he said, did you, and I said, no, I didn't do it. It must have been somebody who looked like me, but I didn't do it, lying. And the principal said, well, the teacher said she saw you, and we're going to suspend you, and we're going to take away your privilege of giving the valedictorian speech. And I was scared to death of what my mother and father would say, because they were proud of me, and they were very proud of this, and my aunt and uncle were coming to the graduation, and I felt just terrible. And the next day, they said they changed their mind, and they would let me give the valedictorian speech, and they weren't going to suspend me. And I wondered what had happened. Well, I took journalism class from a man called Mr. Mullaney. Now, this Mr. Mullaney influenced my entire life. He went to the principal and said, if you do that to Jerry after she's had such, good for something like that, he said, I'm leaving the school. So they decided they didn't want to lose him, so they decided to change their mind about me. And the day of graduation, he handed me a slip of paper, and it said, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it will follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." I've remembered that all of my life. I've been truthful all of my life, and Mr. Mullaney had a bigger influence on my life than any other teacher that I ever had, because of his loyalty, and because he went to bat for me, and because of his of what he told me about being true to yourself, and it really helped to shape my life, Mr. So what's interesting about it is how important a teacher can be to a student if they do the right thing for that student. I mean, it was a silly thing that I would leave school at lunchtime and go across the street and smoke a cigarette. Who was I hurting? Only myself, But to embarrass a student and humiliate a student like that for something like that, he realized that it was a nothing, and he came to bat for me. So anyhow, that had a profound influence on me, because I've been truthful all of my life. More so than I should have been, really, because embarrassingly so. But I don't lie anymore ever since then. So anyhow, I think that's what you were looking for in the story. It was interesting too, because I was also a debater in school, and Miss Rauch was our debating coach, and I thought she was a wonderful person, and she would come to bat for me, but she didn't. She didn't come to bat for me, and I despised her ever since then.
Her true colors.
Yeah, I remember the name, Mr. Mullaney and Miss Rauch, a million years ago, and they still are in my head.
Oh
right.
My goodness! Wow. And can you talk a little bit about how your parents met and what their marriage was like? And
sure. My mother had come out to California to go to University of Southern California. And my father was a member of the B'nai B'rith, which is a social organization, Jewish organization. And the B'nai B'rith was having a conference in Los Angeles. And so they were giving a dance. And they came over to the university, or I guess the head guy came over to the university and said they wanted some Jewish girls to come to the B'nai B'rith dance. And my mother was one who decided to go. And my mother and father met at this dance, a B'nai B'rith dance, and they were married 3 days later. They called Uncle Nat and Annie Kay and told them to come down for the wedding. Annie Kay came down, Uncle Nat couldn't do it, and they were married. I mean, if they hadn't married that way, it's interesting, because if they hadn't married that way, my father probably never would have married, because my grandmother was a very domineering person, and as a result of her my uncle never married, and my aunt never married, and my father probably never would have married either. If he had gone through the courtship and all that stuff, they probably would have talked him out of it.
Or so they would have pushed the
right.
The
so anyhow, that's the story of how they met.
Wow.
My mother came from Milwaukee. She was one of 7 children, and my father is one of 3 children. He lived in San Francisco. He was born in Chicago to parents who had come over from Poland, from Warsaw. I think. They never talked about it.
They never talked about it.
Well, it was Warsaw, because during the war my uncle went back there to see if there were any relatives there that he could bring over.
And were there any relatives?
They'd all been killed.
Wow.
Yeah.
And your mother's family, were they also Polish, or?
They were Polish too, right? Mm-hmm. I know very little about their family, about the family of my mother's family. But my mother had 7. Actually, she was one of 7, and her father was a tailor, and her mother, of course, a homemaker, and lived in Milwaukee. And it was just a strange thing that my mother would have come out to go to the university. She came out here because of a love affair that went bad. She was engaged to marry the president of a bank, and his family was against it because she was Jewish. Again, anti-Semitism comes into our family. And he broke it off. And she was heartbroken and decided to come out to college here so that she wouldn't run into him again in Milwaukee. And met my father.
What a brave woman. She sounds like quite a maverick for that time as well.
Really. My mother was a very independent woman. A very independent woman.
And have you ever traveled back to Poland or tried to trace
No,
anything?
no.
Or
My
no
uncle
lucky?
and aunt went back there, but I've never gone to Poland. I've done a lot of traveling, and I've always wondered, which, but I never have. There's nobody there for me.
And can you talk a little bit about your siblings and what your relationship was like with them as a child, and when you grew older?
A brother and a sister. I'm very close to my sister. I miss her. She's died, but I miss her every day because we used to talk all the time. And I could tell her things that I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't tell my mother and father. I could tell her things that I couldn't tell anybody else. She was my closest friend, and was until the day she died. Even through my marriage and all the problems that happened to me, still she was my best friend. And which I'm so happy to see that you're best friends too, because it's something that lasts you the rest of your life. And my brother and I were never close. I was 7 years older than my brother. He was 13 when I was married, and so I mean we'd never had a close relationship. He was kind of a pain in the... He was a little kid, 7 years younger than I was, and my mother and father kind of doted on him because he was a baby and he was a son, and so I guess I resented him a little bit too. Mm-hmm. But that's all I can tell you about them.
Yeah. Did you all grow up in San Francisco then? And then...
All of us grew up in the same house in San Francisco. Ours was 535 40th Avenue.
And then, and so Tally stayed in San Francisco, and your brother also stayed in San Francisco?
Yeah, both of them did. All of them. My mother and father lived in their home on 40th Avenue for most of their married life. And so that was home base. It's like your mother and father, it's home base. I went away to college to University of California, and I lived on campus, but I would come home all the time, and so that was the home. Was the 535 40th Avenue. And my sister lived at home until she went off to college also and met her husband and got married. And Al, too. That was the home base for all of us. We went back there one day. I think I was with Mike. And we decided we would visit the house. And a Japanese couple had bought the house. That whole area now is Asian out in the Richmond district. And a very nice man. He invited us in to see the house, and we went. I went around looking at the rooms, and that was really déjà vu all over again. That was an interesting experience. But that was that.
Yeah. Did it look different than you remembered it?
No, yeah. He turned one of the closets into a second bathroom. We never had a second bathroom. We hadn't had one bathroom. And we had a sunroom, and he had changed it a little bit, but essentially it was the same house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And your father, if I remember right, he was a banker in San Francisco.
He was a real estate. He had residential real estate. He worked for himself, but he also handled Paramount Properties, which they owned a lot of property in San Francisco. He was a real estate man all of his life.
Wow. And your mom stayed?
My mom was a housewife, right?
Okay. And what about growing up, like, the friends that you hung out with, what were they like? Did you carry any of them with you as you moved forward?
It's interesting, I've often wondered what happened to my best girlfriend, a girl by the name of Florence Ufelder, she died very young. And a boy that I was my debating partner, Alec Ross, he's gone now too. He came down to visit us when we lived down here. He was curious to see my family and everything, so that was a renewed relationship. But those are the only two that I remember. Even my bridesmaids, I can barely remember them. Well, my sister was one. And Florence Ufelder was another. But I had other bridesmaids that were sorority sisters of mine. I don't even remember them. Time marches on, and you lose track of people.
Right. And so it was Mr. What was the name of their teacher? Mr. Maloney? Mr.
Mulaney.
Mulaney.
Right.
Was he like...
George Mulaney.
Was he the person who kind of had the biggest influence on the direction of your life?
I would say at that time, morally he did. Morally, he did. There have other people who have had influences on my life later on, as far as what I went in my interests. But as far as my character, I think he had the biggest influence on my life. Yeah.
It's such a great story.
And my mother and my father. My father was a very moral man too, and he imbued a lot of things. My uncle and aunt too. My mother not so much. I mean, she was a typical, Jewish housewife mother, and I never got into her thinking very much. But my father was a very he paid more attention to us as children, as individuals, than my mother did. My mother was more interested in making dinner and keeping the house clean and that kind of thing.
Was she like in the Jewish housewife scene in San Francisco? Kind of like, was the society part of her thing?
No, okay. Not society. But in those days, social life was you gave dinner parties and you had card parties and that kind of thing, and she would go to them and have them, and host them. My mother had a big influence on what I did later on as far as the stock market went. She was interested in the stock market, and my father was interested, and that influenced my interest in the stock market. My mother and my father, and my mother continued her interest in the stock market all of her life.
Did she studied stocks, and did she end up trading?
Right. I mean, she studied the stocks, and she didn't go to school to study them, but she was a lay person.
That's really interesting. I never knew that about your mother.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit, Grandma? So were your father's parents in San Francisco? Were they around, like, as grandparents?
Yes, my father's office was an office that was adjacent to my uncle and aunt's office. So he saw them all of the time, and it was contiguous. My uncle's office, my aunt's office, and my father's office. So it was a very close relationship, which did not please my mother that much, because they had a big influence on him. More so, I think my father would have had a happier marriage if he had distance, if he hadn't been with them all the time. And they all lived in San Francisco, and I saw them frequently. I grew up with my uncle and aunt as almost surrogate parents.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Because they had this Smiling Through, this summer place. And I would spend many summers down there. And they had a cottage on there that was called Al's Hut, and my father's name was Al. And we would spend all of our summers down there, and then I would spend my evenings and with my uncle and aunt. So they were almost like second parents, because they never had children. So my sister and brother and I were sort of like their children, and which was a very nice thing. I had two sets of parents, not really, but they cared about me and I cared about them, and they had a big influence on my life, as much so I think as my own parents did. Yeah.
It always sounds like quite a magical place when people talk about Smiling Through and how beautiful it was, and the summer spent there.
Right.
I'm sad I never got a chance to see
and
it.
And the watermelon on Sunday. Every Sunday they had lots of friends, and their friends would come down there. It was like open house on Sunday, and my aunt would serve, when you bring their lunch or whatever, and then my aunt would serve watermelon. So I always look forward to watermelon on Sunday.
That's such a cool memory.
What was Auntie Kay like? How was her demeanor and personality?
Very domineering. She was Kay. She was Cat.
Okay.
She was Cat. Cat is well named. Very domineering, very bossy, always right, but lots of fun. Lots of fun. Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about, like, my dad growing up? Like, what was he like?
Oh,
and
yeah.
Your relationship was
Yeah.
to him?
Well, your dad was the oldest, and he always had a great imagination. And this I'll never forget. He took a dish towel and would tie it around his neck and go flying down the street. He was Superman. And one of my neighbors said, "Why do you let him do that?" And I said, "Why wouldn't I?" I said, "That's creative." I said, "That's his imagination. When he does that, he's Superman." And I think that kind of, that's what he's done all of his life. He's been Superman all of his life. And he was the oldest and the boss, and he's been the boss all of his life, too. And what can I tell you? He was a bright guy and fun, and much the same as he is now. Always bossy. And very close to Marty. I'm a little saddened by the fact that they aren't that close anymore. But they were very close because of the fact that we moved so much. Every 3 years, Grandpa would have a change of orders and we'd have to move. And of course, the boys were constant companions. So even though they would move to a different place, go to a different school, make new friends, they were always best friends. And they grew up best friends, and that's why I'm a little sorry that they aren't best friends now. But that's life. Yeah.
Yeah, when they were all very close to Linus too.
Yeah,
he was
right.
alive as well.
I mean, they are friends, but
Yeah.
they aren't close. They aren't as close as they were before.
Yeah, Dad talks a lot about how lucky we were to grow up in one area, and have other friends that
Right.
aren't just, ourselves.
That's
because
right.
he felt like his friends were his brothers growing up because you guys
Right.
had to move so much.
That's right. Oh, this I would tell you.
Yeah.
We lived in Coronado, and your dad's best friend was. Now I'm getting a mental block. I can't think of his name. Anyhow, he came home one day and he said, "Why did you name me Gabe? Why did you name me Robert Allen?" He said, "That's such a plain name." He said, and whatever this other guy's name, he said, "That's a name." And I felt so badly that he didn't like his name. And of course then he went and changed his name. I mean, he didn't like it that much. And I thought, Robert Allen is a very pretty name. And what's wrong with Robert Allen? Which goes to show you the difference in generations. Because in my generation, plain names were in. You wanted a plain name. You wanted a Jerry Small instead of Jerry Schmulowitz. He wanted a Gabriel Stepan. I mean, so anyhow, very creative. Even in his own name, he was creative.
We know that too about our dad.
Yeah.
That's a very funny story. When you were younger, what did you think your life was going to be like when you got older? And
Well, when I was younger, I wanted to be a lawyer. I loved to talk, and I was a good debater in school. And when I went to college, I was pre-legal. And then I got interested in economics. And then I got married when I was a junior in college. And in those days, once you got married, that was it. You didn't go back to school. So I had the economic background rather than the legal background because I never did get to law school. Because, you don't go to law school until after you graduate. And so I was more interested really at that point in economics than I was in I wanted to be a lawyer because my uncle was a lawyer and he made a lot of money as a lawyer and I wanted to make a lot of money, so, But anyhow, my aspirations, that would be it. Then, of course, to get married, every woman, in those days, that was a goal, to get married and have a home and have children. And I achieved that goal, too.
yeah, has anything been different than what you would have imagined?
Well, of course, everybody's life is different, and my life isn't the same as anybody else's. I had a very different life in the fact that we moved around and lived in so many different places. I think that's probably the only big difference. And the fact that I started a career at the age of 40. And the reason I started a career, I had 2 careers in my life. In the early days of when we were first married, Grandpa was sent overseas on a tour, and I had a piano, and I started playing the piano and fooling around with the piano, and I wrote a song. And there was a television show called Search for Songs. Del Courtney, who at that time was a big deal, now you probably don't even know the name, had a program on the television called Search for Songs. So I wrote a song, Nothing Ventured, Nothing Gained, and I sent it in to him, and they invited me to be one of the contestants on the show. And lo and behold, I won first prize. And the first prize was, I remember, a clock radio, and the performance of my song on television, and they published the song. So Grandpa came home from overseas, and they had him on the television show, and that was going to be my career. I was going to be a songwriter. Well, this guy, the band leader, had an arranger, Jimmy Sheldon, and Jimmy said to me, I've written some songs, why don't you write some lyrics for those songs? So I said, okay, and Blue Mist was one of them, and I wrote lyrics for his songs, and Jimmy and I were going to be songwriters together. Well, we wrote a bunch of songs, and some of them were performed on his show. And then Grandpa was sent over to Japan. And what was I going to do with my big songwriting career in Japan? Well, they asked me to write a musical play to be performed in Sasebo, which I did. I took South Pacific, and I rewrote all the lyrics to all the songs in South Pacific, and it was done in Subic Bay. And Admiral Beakley was there, and he said, "Oh, this is great. You got to come up to Tokyo and put this on in Tokyo." And I said, well, I had 3 children at the time, and I didn't want to take them out of school and bring them up there, and I was afraid to leave them down because Grandpa was out on a ship. I was afraid to leave them down with just the Japanese servants there that were taking care of them, so I said I couldn't do that. So then Grandpa got transferred to the Philippines, and I heard from Jimmy Sheldon again, and he said, I have a chance to have our song published, and somebody or other, forget the name, is going to do it, but it's going to cost $5,000. And that was the end of my songwriting career. I realized that with 3 children and a 4th one on the way, there was no way I was going to put $5,000 in. I was going to invest $5,000 into a song with the vague hope that maybe something would happen to it. And I realized too that unless you're willing to invest money in what you're doing, nothing is going to happen with it. You don't get it isn't talent, it isn't luck, it's money, and you have to be ready to invest money in it. So that was the end of my songwriting career. And when I rarely touch a piano even now. Because later on, when we came back from Subic Bay, which is in the Philippines, and he got reassigned to San Diego, not San Diego, to San Francisco, to Oakland. We lived in Oakland for a while, and then reassigned back to Coronado. And then Grandpa was sent out to sea again, and I was getting bored, and I didn't want to go back to the music. So I went to school and I took some lessons in economics and investing, and that I was very interested in that. That really caught fire in my interest, and I went to the public library and I read every single book in the public library on investing, every one of them. And then with all this knowledge, I said, I've got to, I got to do something. I've got to invest. I have to put all this knowledge to practice. So I said to Grandpa, would you mind if I took some money? I mean, we were living on, JG's salary. We were living from hand to mouth. I said, if I took some money and bought some stock. And he said, okay. He was good about that. He said, okay, do whatever you want. He was overseas anyhow. So I was so afraid to do it because I didn't want to lose the family money. I didn't want to lose the money. And lo and behold, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the stock market dumped. It went way down. There was a crisis. The bombs were going to be coming over here, and people were getting out of San Diego. I said, if there ever was a chance to make money, this has got to be the opportunity when the market is falling. And I bought 100 shares, and I forget even what I bought 100 shares of. But of course, the next day, when the Cuban Missile Crisis was over, the market bounced back, and I made some money. Well, that just set me up. Wow, this was easy money. I mean, this was easy, and that started my career in investing.
And was there anything, from before you had your career in investment? Was there anything that you kind of learned from the time that you spent as a military wife? What did that kind of teach you, and did that bring anything into your next kind of phase?
It gave me the opportunity to see different people, different places. I think it broadened my horizons. It was definitely a plus in my life, even though I resisted it and I resented it because that isn't what I married Grandpa for. I thought he was going to get out of the service. And the only reason he got back into the service was that he was called back in at the time of the Korean War. And then by that time he had years, and we might as well stay in and get the, but it wasn't the life that I wanted, and yet having been forced into it, I was very happy that I had it because it did broaden me. Rather than staying in the same house all my life and seeing the same people and doing the same things, it made me have to adapt. And it made my kids have to adapt, and I think it made them better people too, having to adapt to different people in different situations. And every 3 years you had to pick up and move. When we moved into this house, I said to Grandpa, you're going to bury me in the rose garden. I'm never going to move again, ever. I don't know what happens. I'm never going to move. I forget how many times we had to move in the career. Well, every 2 or 3 years we had to pick up and move. Yeah, that's the way the Navy life is. The military life is. I never made close friends in the military because, to be honest with you, here we get back to the anti-Semitism again. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in the service. Very few Jewish people picked the service as a career. And if it hadn't been for the war, Grandpa never would have picked it either. But there are relatively few. In fact, when we were in Japan, which was very nice of the service to do, it was Passover. And they flew over matzahs and the stuff that you'd need for Passover. There were only 2 families that were Jewish out of the entire complement of families. So we did run into, because our name was Weiss and obviously we were Jewish, we did run into anti-Semitism in the service. So we never got close to people. We never had good friends. And then the fact that you were moving every 3 weeks, every 3 years, even when we lived in Philadelphia, there were people there that we were friendly with, but they knew we were going to be moving in a couple of years, so they didn't want to be bothered because they knew in 2 years we would be out of there. So we never had close friends. I had a lot of acquaintances, a lot of parties, and the Navy gives lots of parties, but never close friends while we were in the early years of our marriage.
And do you think a lot of Jewish people didn't go into the service because of the anti-Semitism? That was the main
A lot of it was that. And also we weren't drinkers, and a lot of people in the Navy are heavy drinkers. So when you go to a party and you're standing there and you don't drink, again, we were set aside. The Jews that don't drink.
They're not fun.
No, they're not fun.
How did Grandpa get into the military? Was he?
He was at college, and you either went into it or you signed up for ROTC or V12. V12 was the Navy, and he signed up for V12, and they sent him to Harvard to get his V12 military. And when he graduated as an ensign. That's how and the war was on. That happened during the war. He actually did not see the war during World War II. He was stationed in Hawaii, and the war was over. He'd been there for about a year, and the war was over. But he did, during the Korean War, when he was called back, he was over in Korea for a while. He went to the University of Virginia, and in order to avoid being drafted, he signed up for the V12, and they sent him to Harvard, and he got his degree at Harvard.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and then when he got his degree, he graduated as an ensign.
Wow.
That's how that happened. Yeah.
And so can you talk? I remember last time you were telling us that you only knew Grandpa a couple of weeks before you were married. Or agreed to get married, got engaged.
Oh, right.
Can you tell us that story again? And just and then also that I was interested in that piece where you said that you thought he was going to be getting out of the military and he went back in. That's an interesting piece.
Well,
as well.
I was at college. I was in a sorority, the AE5, and he was a PILAM when he was at the University of Virginia. And it's a Jewish fraternity, and AE5 is a Jewish sorority. And the PILAMs used to date the AE5 girls. So when he was sent out here waiting for orders, he dated some girls, but he was low on money, and he decided, well, if you take out a college girl, well, you take her to a movie, you take her for a soda, it isn't a lot of money. So he came over to the AE5 house, and I met his roommate, who was Jerry King, tried to date me, or wanted to date me, and I had just broken up with a guy, and I wasn't really interested in him. And because his roommate tried to date me, Grandpa decided, to be very competitive. He was very competitive. He had to date me too, and I thought he was, a big bag of wind. I wasn't at all interested in him. But the guy that I had just broken up with, who broke my heart, he was going to be at the sorority house that night because he was dating one of my sorority sisters. And I decided I'll show him. I'll be going out with an ensign, and he'll have to eat his heart out because he'll see me going out with this handsome ensign. And so I said okay, and went out with him. Well, after we went out, then he started talking about his family, and he was a nice guy, and eventually I fell in love with him. But I knew him for 2 weeks, and then he got his orders and went overseas, and we wrote and talked on the telephone, and one day he called and said, "Tell your mother to plan a wedding because I'm going to be home, and we'll get married." Okay, and
that was it. It was that simple.
Right.
I hope this isn't prying, but what did your parents think of Grandpa? What were their impressions of him?
They liked him because he was a nice Jewish boy, and he was a college man, and he fit all the requirements that they had of him. They weren't too sure about him, though, because, and this is kind of funny, when he stayed at our house, and he went into the liquor cabinet and poured himself a drink. Now, Grandpa really was not a drinker, but for some reason he poured himself a drink. So my mother thought he was a shikker. Shikker is Jewish for a drunk. And she was very, very frightened of me marrying a shikker. But I said, "No, I don't think he is, Mom. I don't think he is." So anyhow, but he met all the requirements. Nice family, a nice Jewish boy, college graduate, ensign in the Navy. He met all the requirements. They were pleased. Yeah, they were pleased.
Wow.
And I remember walking down the aisle. We were married to Temple Emmanuel, and thinking I was so happy. I've never been that happy in my life. I just could hardly stand it. I was so happy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then you had the reception at the Palace Hotel, right?
Palace Hotel, right.
Which I think is so beautiful.
Yeah.
In San Francisco.
Oh my gosh.
Were you close with Grandpa's family?
Well, Grandpa was very close to his family. Mm-hmm. And so when we were living in Philadelphia, we were in proximity. They lived in New York. And so we went to see them frequently. And then when we lived out here, they would come out to visit us in the summertime. We visited, but we never really lived close to them to be close to them, except when his father died, and his mother moved out here. And then we saw her a lot. She lived for a while at the hotel here in La Jolla, and then she got very ill and lived in a nursing home for a while, and then she was very unhappy there, and then she moved here, and she lived here for a while until she died. But he was a very good son. He was very good to his mother. He always, I kind of resented their closeness, to be honest with you. Yeah. But I never I tried not to show it. Mm-hmm. But he was very, very good son. He was a good son. He was good to his mother.
Mm-hmm. Did he have siblings?
Yes, he had a brother, Uncle Don, and I don't know whether you want this. His father had more confidence in Don than he did in Grandpa. So he left a lot of money to his wife, but he left it Uncle Don was in charge of it. He was the executor. Mm-hmm. And Uncle Don was building a business of his own, and he invested a lot of this money in this new business that he was trying, and it didn't work out. And he lost a lot of the money that should have been divided equally between Grandpa and so Grandpa resented it very much so, and Uncle Don, I guess, felt a little badly about it too. And so there was a rift between them, and that was the way that turned out. They ended up not being very friendly toward the end. Mm-hmm.
And they probably still live on the East Coast. His family.
And Uncle Don is dead now too.
Right.
Yeah.
Where did Grandpa grow up? Was he from New York or?
He was born in New Rochelle, which is a suburb, a very fancy suburb of New York. You know, like La Jolla would be to San Diego.
Oh, okay.
And he was born and raised there until he went off to college. Actually, he was born in the Women's Hospital in New York, which he loved to shock people by saying, I was born in the Women's Hospital in New York. but they actually lived in New Rochelle. Yeah.
Grandpa's a funny character.
Yeah, he was.
What did his parents do? Were they also kind of...
His father was in the export-import business, and his mother was a housewife. Mm-hmm. His mother came from a very wealthy family, and father was a self-made man who made a lot of money, and then Don went and lost it.
Can you talk a little bit about, this, being Jewish, I guess, what traditions were passed down in your family? I mean, obviously you didn't make your kids get bar mitzvahed and bat mitzvahed, but, what has being Jewish meant to you, and maybe how has that relationship changed over time?
My mother was very into her Jewishness. My father didn't. My father was not a religious man. He was a moral man, but not a religious man. They did send me to Sunday school, and I was confirmed, and went through the whole thing. And we did the Jewish holidays, but I didn't go to temple on Friday nights or Saturday mornings, which you're supposed to do, because it was a Reformed Jewish synagogue, and I'm more ethnically Jewish than I am religiously Jewish. I know that I'm Jewish, and I know there's a lot of anti-Semitism around because I experienced it myself, and I know that what happened in Germany was a horrible thing, and I think every Jew feels that and remembers that and doesn't want that to ever happen again. But as far as the trappings of being Jewish, that doesn't mean anything to me. And it didn't mean anything to my father, and I guess I got that from my father. My mother was she was afraid not to do the things that you were supposed to do, light the lights and the candles and all that. She was afraid not to be Jewish because that's the way she was raised. But my father was raised in a more secular family, and I guess that rubbed off on me because I'm proud of being Jewish. I'm proud of what went on before. But my idea about religion is not that you have to go to a synagogue or that you have to celebrate holidays or that it's what's inside of you, it's the goodness of you and to do good and to be truthful. Well, Mr. Mulaney had more influence on my religion than any religious, So I've never been a very religious person. I've been a moral person, but not a religious person.
But you cared about raising your children, that they knew that they were Jewish.
I felt that I owed it to my heritage to raise my children Jewish, and I don't know whether you knew this story, but I always think of Bob and Marty went to Sunday school, and Gabe was about to be bar mitzvah. And he was given a choice. He also was a Boy Scout, and his time to be a what do they call it? An Eagle Scout ran parallel to the time that he was going to be bar mitzvah. He couldn't do both because being bar mitzvah took a lot of time, and being an Eagle Scout took a lot of time. So we gave him a choice. Do you want to be bar mitzvah, or do you want to? And he obviously took the Eagle Scout and was not bar mitzvah. But there was another thing that turned your dad off, and that was his friend Greg O'Leary, who was his best friend so many years. And there was a dance at the synagogue, and he invited Greg O'Leary to come to the dance. And they both had a good time. And later, the rabbi said to Gabe, he didn't want him to bring Greg O'Leary to the dance anymore because the mothers of the girls objected to their daughters being in contact and meeting and maybe falling in love with somebody who wasn't Jewish. Gabe so resented that, and I don't blame him for that, and neither did Grandpa, that he didn't want anything more to do with that. And so, I mean, that really was one of the things that motivated him not to be bar mitzvah, but to go the other course and to go the other way. And I think that he was right. Although it would have possibly made him a better Jew if he'd been bar mitzvah, and he doesn't do anything about his Eagle Scout. There's nothing to him now. At the time, that was a big deal, Yeah. That was it. He chose to be an Eagle Scout instead of a bar mitzvah.
And did Grandpa also share your views of kind of, raising kids culturally Jewish, but not
and it didn't mean that much to Grandpa either. Yeah. Right. The only one it would have meant something to would have been my mother. My mother would have liked to have been there.
Did Marty kind of follow Gabe? Did they have
Yeah,
that relationship?
Marty was a 3 years younger Gabe.
Yeah.
Whatever Gabe did, Marty wanted to do. They were, as I say, they were very, very close.
Was Linus a lot different than the two of them, and Kat different?
Well, by the time Linus came along, they were quite a bit older. Gabe is, 9 years older than Linus, and so I mean he was the little brother, but there was never, they became very close when they became an adult.
Mm-hmm.
But as they were growing up, they weren't close. There were too many years separating them, you know.
And I know we get to hear a lot about your working life, but I guess just I wanted to talk with you more about kind of broad lessons that your working life might have taught you.
When I started the business, I started it with a partner, Fred Whitmore. And the first 2 years, we just limped along. A man, his name George Sheldon. He was the owner of KSDO radio station. He put some money into the business, and so we had some seed money to start with. And after a couple of years, we weren't making it. We were just covering expenses. And Fred's wife said, "It's enough. 2 years is enough. You better go out and start earning a living." And fortunately, because I had a husband who was supporting me, I could limp along without getting an income. So I bought out Fred, and continued the business. And the next year we started making money. And the thing that it taught me was to persevere. And if you really like something, you really want to do something. Actually, I'd put $2,000 in it myself, and I didn't want to lose my $2,000 investment. That's the thing that really kept me going, was the fact that I had to be successful, because if I wasn't, I would have lost my investment. And I didn't want to disappoint my family, because so anyhow, that is the big lesson, is to persevere, not to give up, to keep going, and eventually it works out if you really love what you're doing. And you got to get into something you really love what you're doing, and then you're willing to sacrifice. I would get up for 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning in order to get to work, and because the market opens at 6:30 here, because that's 9:30 in the east, and I mean, I sacrificed a lot of family life for that. But you have to love what you're doing in order to do that. And it's wonderful if you find something that you love and that you're willing to sacrifice for. And that's the thing. Find something that you love, that you're willing to sacrifice for, and then sacrifice for it. Mm-hmm. And it will repay you, because my business has repaid me in the pleasure that it's given me, and the notoriety. It gives you pleasure, and the money, the financials, the fact that I'm financially secure now. I never could have been secure if I hadn't, because Grandpa did not save, and he didn't have insurance or anything like that. So when Grandpa died, if I hadn't had a business, I don't know what I would have done. I would have had to go out and work, or just a menial thing. Mm-hmm. So you've got to take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. Don't count on a husband to take care of you. You've got to take care of you. You've got to plan for your own future, and take care of yourself. Because you never know. You never know. And you do know about yourself. Yeah. You can count on yourself.
One of the stories you told me that's really inspiring to me was when you started your business, kind of needing to be a bit more ambiguous about the fact that you were a woman, because nobody would trust you with their money, or
right.
Had all these stereotypes about what women were. It seems like the landscape for women's equality has shifted and changed, since that time.
Absolutely.
But, so I wonder what your thoughts are on that, and how much you really think it has changed, because I still think there are issues that I definitely deal with in my workplace around being a woman. So I just wondered from your perspective.
I think that the opportunities are greater now. The opportunities are there. And I wouldn't think of myself as a woman versus a man. Think of what you're doing and what you want to do, and good heavens, the sky's the limit now for women. It wasn't when I wanted to do it. I just did it because I wanted to do it, and whether I became famous or succeeded or anything, it was something it was what I wanted to do. I wasn't a club woman. I didn't want to have luncheons. What am I going to do with my life? I have to find something that I really like to do. And that's what you have to do. Find something you really like to do, and then do it. because the opportunities now are endless for women. Women can do anything. I mean, they're accepted any place now. And the salaries are the same, and the opportunities are the same. I mean, it's much better. Of course, also the competition is worse now because there are a lot of brilliant women. And I don't know if I could, although there still are not women that are publishing investment advisories. It still is a very limited field for women in the investment business. I still occasionally see a woman on television, but it isn't a usual thing. It's still a man's world as far as the investment community goes. But women can do it if they really want to do it because they're doing it, and I think that's true of any field.
Is your hope then for kind of future generations of women entrepreneurs that just the opportunities continue to be endless and that the playing
Absolutely, but there's one thing that disturbs me is while I'm happy that women are able to do whatever they want to do now, the fact that women are not home taking care of their families bothers me because I think that there's a deficit in a young generation now because there isn't a mother home taking care of them and worrying about them and seeing that they're warm and seeing that they're eating well. I'm glad for the women, but I'm sorry for the generation of kids that aren't getting that motherly attention at home. Fortunately, I was 40 when I started my business, so I did, the only child that I had to worry about was Linus. He still was in school, in grammar school. But I was a stay-at-home mother during those years, and I'm glad that I did that for the sake of my children. And I'm sorry and I'm so glad that Marta is doing that too, because she's a very intelligent girl, and I think she brings a lot to Melina, and I'm glad that she's sensible enough to do that. And I think that more women should do that too. Raising a family is a wonderful occupation. Thing is that you reach a point, like I reach a point where then what do you do? And it's hard for a woman to start a career after her kids are out of the nest. But it's a difficult balance there because I know that women want to be personalities themselves and want to succeed on their own, and yet it's hard to do that when you're starting at 40. And it's much easier to do that when you're starting at the bottom of the ladder and climbing up, but yet then I think your home life suffers. So it's a problem.
It's hard choices. Yeah, definitely hard choices. And I also wondered, obviously you had this, big marriage with our grandfather, and you have this big marriage with Mike, and kind of what both marriages, they've taught you different things. You've obviously been different people in them, somewhat.
Oh, right. They're entirely different marriages because in the one marriage you're building a family, and you're building a future. Mm-hmm. This marriage, we're just having fun. I mean, we're just loving each other, and this is a selfish marriage. I mean, this is just us. This is wonderful. The other marriage, we lived for our kids and for the success of the children and the health of the children and the family unit. It's totally different. Now it's just us. It's a fun marriage. I mean, this is just totally different. When you marry this late in life, your personalities are formed. Yeah. He doesn't try to change me. I don't try to change him. We just enjoy our life and what we're doing, and we love each other very much. I mean, we're best friends, and we enjoyed what we do together. And I'm just so blessed to have found somebody like that. In fact, when Grandpa died, I thought, oh, dear God, let me find somebody I can enjoy the rest of my life with, because it was a tiring marriage. It really was. It was an exhausting marriage. And I did. I'm not a religious person, but okay. Along came Mike, and I'm a very happy woman, and it's a very happy marriage. Yeah. And I'm very blessed. I'm blessed with, my whole life has been blessed. Blessed with my children, blessed, the only impediment in my whole life was losing. When I lost Grandpa, he was 70 years old, okay, and he was ill, and we had a long life with him, but Linus went too young. I miss him every day. Mm-hmm. much more than I miss Grandpa. I miss Linus because he was young and there was more to his life that should have been. But I've had such a wonderful life. I really have. I mean, I just hope it goes on for a long time more. But I've been very, very blessed. I was blessed with 2 wonderful marriages and wonderful kids, and I've just been very blessed. A wonderful career. I've had a little notoriety. Look up Geraldine Weiss Investment Quality Trends on your computer. You'll find a whole bunch of stuff there about me, which surprises me because I didn't put it there, but out of articles that I've written, and it's amazing. It's nice to have had a little that kind of success too, a little notoriety. Not so much as that would be the motivating thing in your whole life, but it's nice. It's nice when people come up and ask you for your autograph. Wow, I'll never forget, we were at a seminar, and I was having lunch with John, and I don't know where Kat was, but John and Kat were with me. I think it was up in San Francisco at a seminar there, and somebody came up to the table and asked me for my autograph, and that blew John away. That's the thing that impressed me, was the fact that it was so impressed John. He was so impressed. But anyhow, that's the fun in life too. That's fun. It's the fun to succeed is nice when you have the financial thing, but the fun to succeed is the feeling of success too. That's a good feeling. I'm sure you both have experienced that on a different scale, but it really is a good feeling to have succeeded. Anyhow, I've had a happy life. What can I tell you?
You told us a lot.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you taking the time to do this, Grandma. It's so great to hear all these stories. So many stories you just told that I've never heard, and it's so valuable to hear them and to get a better picture of what our family was like before.
Well, I'm anxious to see. I hope I live long enough to see what happens to you girls. My goal is to live to be 100, but I'll take 90. But I want 100.
You're gonna do it.
Yeah.